us in the Fire Up series. It's a Startup Insight series that we are now doing jointly with SucSEED Innovation Fund, CIE and SucSEED Innovation Fund. And so today, the topic we're going to be discussing is just understanding term sheets, right? It's a very, very complex document and so much of buzzwords. On first reading, it seems like we understand, but then like later you just think about it, like it seems like we understood nothing. Yeah, there's so many ifs and buts and questions come up. So we have with us today Dhiraj, who is one of the partners, general partners at SucSEED Innovation Fund, and himself a lawyer. And so we thought, like, who better than Dhiraj, who's kind of helps draft these agreements and also helps decipher agreements when they come for investments to understand where there might be some gotchas or some loopholes and such. So Dhiraj, thank you so much. Welcome to the Fire Up series.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you for having me.
So Dhiraj, let's get started. I mean, like, to set the context, can you share some of the key agreements that get into place or key documents that get into place in an investment? So then we can get into the term sheet. Just if you can just lay what all happens in the sequence from the time an investor decided to invest, what all documents get signed until the money hits the bank.
Sure. So just to give you the context, that term sheet, as the name suggests, it's just a sheet which contains the terms, and then you move to the next level, which is the due diligence process starts after the term sheet. Then you get into the definitive agreement, which is commonly known as shareholders agreement or investment agreement, whatever you call it. And along with the shareholder agreement, you sign share subscription agreements, which is basically to investor to subscribe into the shares of the company. And then coupled with that, there are a lot of undertakings are signed. For the startup segment, we also ask founders to sign an employment agreement with the company, so that they are bound with an employment contract with the company. That happens when the investor comes in, because initially the founders are not signed up any employment contract, or contracts are very simple, appointment later kind of a thing, because they think they are the owners of the company, so they don't need to sign an employment contract. So a lot of education happens along with when an investor comes in, at different stages, whether at the seed stage, angel stage, or in the venture capital stage. So founders get a lot of education throughout the process.
So I think that's a good context. Now the term sheet, I mean, like you said, term sheet is just a sheet of paper. It's just to say that things that have been discussed on the phone and in emails and everything. He said document where, like, they're saying, okay, we'll now base the agreement, do the agreement based on these terms. So the investment is kind of formalized, subject to due diligence and such. That is, the rest of the terms have been agreed. Now the terms in the term sheet also find its way into the agreement, but the term sheet is a slightly more distilled, non-legal English version of it. So when we refer to term sheet, you're right. Yeah, it is just a document, but it is a simplified version. So let's look at the terms, which are initially given in the term sheet, but then later finds its way into the agreements also. What are some broad areas in which the terms exist? Generally, when a term sheet is signed.
Typically, the term sheet gives you, term sheet is the first formal stage where, the investor comes in, and signs a term sheet or issues a term sheet with the founders, saying, I'm proposing to invest in your company. I intend to invest in your company. And these are the broader framework on which we will, invest into the company. So the term sheet contains the broader framework. Sometimes the term sheet are very detailed. Sometimes the term sheets are simple. It depends upon the investors to investors, how they look at it. It's always better to have a detailed term sheet, so that tomorrow when you move into the definitive agreement, there is no difference, or there is no disagreement between what we agreed and what we did not agree. So it's always good to have a detailed term sheet at the beginning, so that the founders know that what terms and conditions and what are the nitty-gritties and what are the what are the lines on which I'm the investors is interested. It is also good for the investors, so that when they negotiate the term sheet with the founders, they know where all where all they can negotiate, where all they can agree, where all they can leave certain things, where all they have to be very strict and very rigid on that. So term sheet is typically they call it as non-binding agreement because it's subject to the due diligence and subject to the investor discretion after that. But most of the term sheets get converted into a definitive agreement unless there are major red flags appear into the due diligence where the investors thinks that it's not worth risk taking. That happens at every stage. Means at the early stage startup also.
So the only uncertainty is the due diligence if it shows up anything. But other than if due diligence doesn't show up a flag, the terms are all agreed and the same thing will be signed.
Yeah. So once the term sheets are issued and signed, so the only major difference is that unless there are red flags, it basically converted into a definitive agreement.
Okay.
Goes into.
So broadly, what are the types of terms? I mean, like there are the rights, there are some conditions, there are follow-on investment-related terms. But broadly, what are the various areas in which you have terms in the term sheet?
So broadly, if we can list out some around 8-10 terms which are common in all the investment term sheet. To start with, the first is the valuation basically. So the valuation is the first thing when the founders and investor agree that this is the valuation of the company at which I'm investing. Sometimes it's defined as a pre-money valuation, which is nothing but the valuation at which the investors are coming in. And then there will be post-money valuation term, which means the pre-money valuation plus the investment amount. So if valuation is 10 crore and investor is putting up 1 crore, then post-money will be simple addition of 10 plus 1, 11 crore is the post-money. So the valuation and pre-money valuations are the same thing. So once the valuation is agreed, which is the basic, basic fundamental on which investors agree, the commercial basic understanding, which is derived from valuation, business metrics, the performance, the future profitability, what are the projections, what is the potential, how niche is the business, depending upon the market sentiment as well. Like currently, because of COVID, EdTech sector is on a role. So valuation in a tech sector is typically higher than what it was earlier these days. So that's how the valuations are determined. That is also subject to negotiations between the founders and the investors, and it's a very subjective term. The second most important part for a term sheet is what we call ROFR, which is nothing but right of first refusal. So
for the follow-on funding.
For the follow-on funding or for the transfer restrictions, basically. So ROFR is operates at two levels. One is the follow-on funding. So if the company is going to raise future funds, then they will have to ask the existing investors to accept it, or say I'll partly participate or I will not participate. But before it opens to the third party, you have to give the right of first refusal to existing investors. So that's how ROFR works. It also works at the second level where if the founders needs to transfer their shares, they will have to offer it to the investors first before it sells it to third party or in the market. So it protects the investors that founders cannot sell their shares without their approval. So it operates at two levels. There are the ROFR goes into the detailing in the definitive agreement, which talks about how much notice period, what happens when, what if the partly ROFR is accepted, partly not accepted, and all that. So it goes into detailing into the definitive agreement.
So what are the other follow-on, just while at the topic of follow-on funding, the terms like drag along and some of the other terms that come. What are the other terms that are relating to follow-on funding?
So the drag along and tag along are not part of the follow-on round. They're part of the exit mechanism where when investors, because they are the financial investor, the founders need to give them an exit out of, and after some time, 3 to 5 years, is generally the process, generally the market practice into the startup ecosystem. So drag along and tag along are part of exit mechanism where investors invest today and the founders agreed that within next 5 years I will get you an exit. That exit could be either third party comes and buy those shares from the investor, or company has the money to buy back the shares at a particular rate of return. Or if that doesn't happen, then probably the investor themselves find a buyer. But investors mostly will be in minority, so they drag the founders along saying, I am selling to this guy, you also sell it to this guy so that I get an exit, because the new investor may not be interested in having a minority stake. So the founders get dragged along by the investors. Tag along works in other way around, where if founders are selling their shares to a strategic partner, then investor tag along with them saying, you are selling, I am tagging along with you, whatever price you are selling, I'll also sell at the same price. So that's how the tag along, drag along works, which is basically an exit mechanism for investors.
Now, are there other either exit related or investment related terms?
So exit related, the most important for the founders to to understand is the liquidation preference, which is very crucial for any investment. Liquidation preference is nothing but a preference to the investors when there is a liquidation happening in the company. And liquidation doesn't mean that company is getting closed. Liquidation means if there is an acquisition happening in the company, somebody is coming and acquiring the company, or some M&A happening with the company, or there is a dissolution happening with the company when the company is not doing good. So in those cases, investors get their protection done, saying, I will be getting paid before the founders get paid. So that's how the liquidation preference simple terms mean. So there is a preference of the investors in liquidation cases that before the founders are paid, the investors will be paid. Typically, we talk about liquidation preference of 1x of the investment amount. So that's the standard practice. Founders should be careful and what are they agreeing on the liquidation preference, because that gets detailed into the definitive agreement, where they talk about how the liquidation preference will be calculated, how will they decide, and how much they will be paid. They will be either the fair market value proportionate they will be paid, or whatever investment they have made, that will be paid first. So there are a lot of detailing happens in the investment agreement later on after the term sheet.
Okay, so liquidation preference is one more exit term. Are there any other exit related terms typically included?
Exit related terms, we have covered exit, preference, liquidation preference, drag along, tag along. There are also important issues like anti-dilution, which comes into play when the company raises the next round at a lower valuation than the previous round. So what happens is that if I invested at say 10 crore valuation, and tomorrow company valuation is gone down to 8 crore, I will be at a loss. So early investors are at a loss, and the new investors are getting a better deal. So to protect that, what investors talk about is the anti-dilution, which says that tomorrow if you are raising a round which is at a lower than my valuation, then I will be also getting get some additional shares, so that my average price is the same. So I also get into the same valuation with the current round is. So like anti-dilution also have a lot of detailing. Basically it is the full ratchet or half ratchet, where you talk about what all will be excluded, what will not be excluded in calculating the anti-dilution issues. So all that has to be understood by the founders very carefully.
So the other thing that comes often is the operating conditions, like a board seat, or like where there is a veto and like things. So what are those terms? I mean, they are grouped under what bucket?
So those are particularly part of the management and operations, which is typically part of the board related clauses, which says that investor will have a right to nominate a person from their side on the company, either as a director, or these days the trend is to have a board observer seat, because the being a director has certain regulatory challenges for the investors nominee. So along with the board seat, you comes the reserve matter rights, which is veto right, what we call, or affirmative voting matters, what we call, which in simple terms says that there are certain decisions, key strategic decision, key financial decisions, in which investors' consent will be required. Prior consent will be required before you take the action, so that there is no, like, typically those matters are like there is any change in the, share holding pattern of the company, or, transfer of shares, or any, debt raised for the company, where, the company assets are being mortgaged, or any sale of IP or sale of assets of the company. These are the matters which falls under the reserve matters. Idea is to, the founders have, good enough operational flexibility, and investors have the protection, so that nothing wrong is happening, or no dilution of their value is happening, or no fund, company assets are not being sold without telling them, so that their investments are protected. So good reserve matter is, having an ideal balance between the operational flexibility for the founders, and adequate protection for the investors. But these are all subject to the, negotiations between the founders and the investors.
Are there other terms when it comes to management operations controls?
Management control, similar provisions are for the shareholders meeting as well, that how the decision making will flow. Typically, if you're raising, rounds from multiple investors, the founder should, should ensure that there is a single person authorized to deal, from the investors, like mainly from the angel investor group when you raise funds. Because if the 10-15 people are coming as an investor, the founders should not be, dealing with, or should not be forced to deal with all those many people. One person should be authorized to, handle the investor relation between the founders and the investors. So, those are the processes, those are the systems you can put in, those are the, clauses you can negotiate in the term sheet, and, and include, so that it's get into the, definitive agreement.
So some investors put specific controls on hiring certain types of people.
Is
that also a normal thing?
Typically, senior management people beyond a particular salary, level, they want, investors to, investor to, control that, or investors prior consent should be sought. Idea is that you should not be hiring somebody who is not competent, or somebody who is relative of the founder. They don't get hired. These are checks and balances to be put in. So reserve matter is a pretty detailed one. We have seen many very strict rigid reserve matters also, and, flexible reserve matters as well. It all, it's a matter of negotiation between the founders and, and the investors.
So are there any other types of, so there is the investment valuation, follow-on funding related terms, and there is the whole exit related terms, and there is the operating control related terms. Are there any other types of terms?
There are other terms which are part of the term sheet, are like ESOP pool. So investors, when they come in, they want an ESOP pool to be created, so that in future, the right talent could be attracted and retained. Ideally, it ranges from 8% to 15% range of the equity pool. So that much of equity is earmarked for hiring the employees and all, which ensures that the in future investors does not get diluted, because a pool is created. Second is that the ESOP is available for retaining, attracting talent. Other clauses could be like the investors also want information rights, which means that periodically the founders will be sharing those informations, like MIS, or quarterly numbers, monthly numbers, business metrics, performance, any information which is which requires to be informed to the investor, which is material. So all those information rights are also part of the term sheet, so that investors are protected, or investors have the knowledge of the things going on in the company.
So sometimes, like, when so founders have a lock-in. So those come under operating terms, or is it a separate set of clauses?
Those are part of the ROFR.
And founder terms.
Those are part of the ROFR. So ROFR operates on the founders lock-in, which says that for next 5 years or next 3 years, founder shares will be locked in. So it means that they cannot transfer it at all. Exceptions are in cases like transferring to spouses and all, or in an unfortunate event of having death of a founder, it goes to their legal heirs. So founders lock-in is part of the ROFR. in some cases, we see, larger investors, also putting conditions on the smaller investors that they will also not transfer without the without the consent of the larger investors.
So ROFR is assuming they're selling. When the founders are selling, then they're the rights. How do you prevent from the founders selling? There are those clauses also.
So in case of, so lock-in is one clause where you talk about, 5 years lock-in, but what happens is the lock-in also comes along with a clause that, okay, for next 12 months, everything is locked in. After that, every month there will be a particular installment which will be opened up for the founders. So that the founders get those shares vested in them. And those shares vested with the founders are, not subject to lock-in. So to protect that, ROFR is included.
So what is the procedural control for that? I mean, because the shares would already be with the founder. So is it just an agreement control, or is there some other procedural control also that we introduce?
Procedural control is at the board level, because every action of the company has to be done by the board. So that's why the investors take the board seat and observer seat, and that's how the reserve matters are included there. So, it's a chronology. So you have the restriction on the agreement that you will not sell without my approval. And to ensure that procedural requirements are, it comes to the board. So the investor had the nominee in the board, and at the board level, either as a director or an observer. And the same thing is controlled through the reserve matters, where anything which is related to transfer requires investors' prior consent, affirmative consent, without which it can't happen. So, it's a complete package, complete, entire 360 degrees covered, through this process.
And then the terms of vesting itself, I mean, a lot of them as a variation of the lock-in, there is also promoter shares vesting. What are those terms typically?
Typically, vestings are monthly, and it's advisable for the founders to have monthly vesting, because every month, like typically what we do and we agree on is a 5 years lock-in and 1 year complete lock-in, and after that, every month for next 48 months, 1/48th of the number of shares which the founders are holding get vested in them. So every year for next 48 months, every month, next 48 months, certain percentage of the shares, certain number of shares will get vested in the founders, which they can sell, but subject to the ROFR provisions.
So this includes the promoters holding also, what they already had?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So does that involve any change to the ROC, or is it just an agreement that is signed?
Come again, sorry?
So this vesting, is it notified to the ROC also, or is it just promoter
no, this is an understanding between this is an understanding between the investors and the founder. To ROC, we do not report all these in one piecemeal. Whenever an SHA is entered, the shareholder agreement are executed. The shareholder agreement provisions are incorporated into the articles of association of the company, which gets filed with the ROC. So any public or you and me can find out that what are the provisions of these articles of these companies, or transfer related or operations related issues.
So if one of the founders were to leave during the vesting period, and there's some part of their, like say 10% of their equity is still unvested, where does it go to?
So there are many ways to deal with it. One is that whatever is the vested portion that remains with the founder, exiting founder. So most of the term sheet also says that founders cannot exit from the company, either by leaving the employment of the company or by transferring the shares. For if somebody is leaving because of certain issues or because of the mutual consent with the investors and other founders, typically it dealt with that whatever is unvested portion will be either transferred to the ESOP pool, so that tomorrow if somebody else comes in, he can be allocated those shares, or it gets transferred to the remaining founders. In some cases, it also comes to the founders and investors both, but basically at the face value, so that there is a penalty on the founders who is living in between.
So so they don't get any value.
So there's no additional benefits for them. Ideally, for the founders, knowledge and education, if the co-founders are leaving, ideally you should ensure that all the shares either are transferred to you or to the pool or to the investors, so that obviously there has to be a commercial arrangement for that, but ideally a third party, a co-founder who is going out, should not have the shares of the company, because that protects the company's interest and investors as well. So all these provisions are included in the in the definitive agreement.
So where should a founder go for advice, especially somebody who's raising structured money for the first time from an angel network or even a VC? Who's the ideal advisor that the founder should make sure the founder has, looking at the agreement from their standpoint?
So I see. Ideally, founders commercial arrangement which founders needs to negotiate the commercials of the investment and all. The nitty gritties. It's always advisable to have an external counsel or a lawyer, who can advise them, because that goes, that adds a lot of value to the agreement when and somebody is representing investors also negotiating, so that they know, and it's more of education rather than negotiation, because when you are a founder and you are raising money and you got a term sheet and you are getting money, you think that okay, you can sign it up anything and later on you will see. But it's always advisable to have a counsel, or hire an external guy, an external lawyer to advise you and negotiate it with
So
you.
any types of lawyer, because all lawyers may not be familiar with investments. So any
No,
particular
not
type of lawyer to look for?
Commercial lawyers, corporate lawyers are the best lawyers. The lawyers who are practicing in civil law and criminal law, they won't be able to help you on this.
So corporate lawyers are
Corporate
the ones
commercial,
that are familiar.
they will
Or
be
commercial.
Yeah, corporate
Okay.
commercial lawyer you should go to.
Okay, so that's the advisor. And what is the role the existing investors play in this process when you're raising money with respect to the whole term sheets and all the legal terms?
So so see, the investment is an evolving process, right? You raise one round, you raise angel round, then you go to the pre-series A round, then you go to series B, series A. So every existing investor play a very important role. First one is that obviously they validate that the company is good. When you have raised money from certain investors, the next round of investors feel more confident about it because there is a validation happening already. Second is the lot of in-house cleaning also happen when an investor comes in. So our experience shows that when you raise money at the seed level, your compliance processes and internal control issues are not taken care of in a startup, because founders are typically the tech guys, or the engineers, or the finance guy who does not have the bandwidth to take care of the compliance and control issues. So when an investor comes in, ensures that there is a due diligence process set in, and compliance system is put in place. So next round of investors, when it comes in, already have a cleaner house to invest in. A lot of small issues are taken care of, a lot of control system is taken care of. Third thing is that the existing investors also handhold the founders, because they become one side, they become a one party, because the new investor who is coming is writing a bigger check. So it also helps them in understanding and hand holding and or educating the founders that what all they should concede to, what all they should they should negotiate, what all they should not.
So we have 1 minute left, almost time. So Dhiraj, one caution note of advice that you would share with the founders as they're negotiating the term sheet and all the legal terms for an investment.
My simple advice always with the founders is to read the term sheet. Don't only look at the numbers that you got this commitment for this much of money at this valuation. There are more to an investment, more to an agreement. So first understand, read the term sheet. If you want somebody to explain to, don't hesitate in calling up known person or any friends who are any other founder who have raised money in past, who can advise you on what all to do. But please read the term sheet, read all the agreement what you're going to sign, including your founders employment agreement, because that helps. That's very important part for the ecosystem.
I know, large documents, but then you're signing up for it, so you must be very clear what you're signing for.
Yeah,
you don't want to be blindsided by some term that comes back to haunt you later.
Yeah, as a lawyer, my advice, my experience in last 5-6 years, since I was working on the startup ecosystem, is that founders should focus on the compliance and internal control measures, because that goes that is a very big differentiator for completing your due diligence, which means that money coming in will get delayed. So if your compliance process is clean and systematic, you close up everything in 2 weeks, rather than closing it in 6 weeks, because if the due diligence, a lot of compliance issue comes, you need to rectify that, you need to complete it. So timing is very important. It get delayed many times because of the due diligence issues or rectifying those issues. So focus on the compliance issues seriously.
So that is very important when they're preparing for investment, to
Yeah,
make sure
that's
the
very
house is in order,
important.
all the documents, process, everything is there. If not, they will get a lot of surprises.
Yeah, what
That
happens
brings
is
to,
that you do it once in a year. Typically I have seen startups doing it once in a year, or when an investor comes in. So that delays a lot of things, and these days a lot of penalties are there. On even that does not differentiate between a large company and a startup. So it gets delayed, and a lot of financial implications are also there. So it's very important that they focus on the compliance from the day one. There are external help is also available. They should hire somebody who can do that subject to the commercials arrangement, but they should focus on that as well.
so that brings out the other thing. I remember seeing terms that are relating to indemnity and fraud and all that.
Yeah.
So that's another terms that founders need to be aware of, right? I mean, sometimes unwittingly you might end up doing something without understanding the seriousness or the implications.
So see, the warranties and indemnity and all work for the benefit of the investors, because the founders are in operating control of the company. They are into the day-to-day management. So what investors says that, okay, you are giving me a warranty that everything is fine, and tomorrow if there is an issue coming in, you will indemnify. So warranty and indemnification work hand in hand. So warranty is saying that
one is protecting them.
Yeah, warranty is a statement. Indemnity is protecting investors from those statements if it is wrong. So that's how the indemnity, warranties and indemnity work. But that's a standard. Means every investor would want that. And the only thing is that in indemnity, the founder should look at it that it cannot be open-ended indemnity. There has to be a limit to that. If you're in, so there has to be an indemnity cap saying if you're investing 10 lakh rupees, you cannot ask for indemnity of 10 crores. So so there should be a cap to it. But warranties and indemnity are very integral part of an investment process.
So the couple of questions. One was on the board formation. If the previous investors have board rights, and how long do these rights continue? And when the new investors come in, how does the current board composition impact?
And it's always good to define a certain shareholding percentage, that if somebody is holding a particular percentage, then only he will have right to nominate, have a board seat or an observer seat, because you cannot give board observer seat to everybody, because if
and that should be done upfront before the first investment.
So not necessary. First investment happen where there is no investor. You agree to have somebody from investors nominee, but slowly the early investors have to cede those rights, because the new investor comes in, the valuation grows, the bigger guy comes in the next investment round, so he will want more rights. But it's always better to have a defined shareholding percentage, 5%, 10%. Sometimes I have seen 2% also, 2-3% for a startup, for angel investors. That so more dilution happens, the early investors have to concede those rights of having a board of director.
So it's better to do this as early as possible, so that some number is stated.
Yeah.
Maybe at the round of the first investment itself.
Yes.
That's something that the startup should ask for.
Yes.
The other question is on like the term sheet. When the previous investors' agreements don't change, right? When a new investor comes in, the terms are only applicable to the new investor. The previous investors' rights are all protected. There's already a signed agreement.
No, so what happens is the agreements get changed, means get updated, but the rights more or less remain same, because whatever we call it, the definitive agreement or shareholding agreement, it applies to every shareholder, whoever, whether has come in early or coming in now. So bigger investor gets a better right in terms of having a board seat and having controlling rights on the reserve matters and all. But all the investors get along with the same shareholding agreement.
But the previous investors' rights are protected still.
Yeah, previous investors' rights are protected.
Unless they voluntarily concede, but their rights are protected.
Their exit rights, their exit rights, their liquidation preference rights, all gets continued. The only thing which they lose, the early investor, is the board seat, because they do not control that much equity. Yeah.
Now, the other one is like, how do we bring balance between investors' desire to cover various possibilities and founders' desire to keep it simple? I mean, founders naturally being non-lawyers want to keep it simple. Investors want to protect against every eventuality.
See, agreement is an agreement, right? So, keeping it simple or keeping it complicated,
I think the question probably should be read saying like, the terms are on whose side? I mean, like investors want to protect their interests, founders want to kind of make their life easy.
Yeah, so every agreement, so if an investor who is putting money into the company, he will want better rights to him. For the founders, it's always good that you have operational flexibility in terms of carrying the day-to-day business of the company and building your team, because there are a lot of deliverables on you in terms of investors for exit and all. So you give them those rights, you protect them there on the exit and liquidation preference and the management and all. But you keep the operational flexibility. So as a good term sheet or a good shareholding agreement is always where the founders have adequate financial and operational flexibility, and investors' rights are also protected through warranties and indemnity, and having the operational say by way of a director or by way of an observer. Reserve matter, sometimes I have seen 40 clauses in the reserve matter, which may be very, very restrictive. But you got to negotiate and you got to explain. But it also depends upon case-to-case basis. How at what stage the company is. As you grow, the reserve matter list gets watered down, gets diluted. Gets less number of the clauses in that, because by the time you're a particular size, you have a track record. So but initially, when you are raising the first round, obviously you will have to concede many rights, because you are raising for the first time. There is no validation for you. So it's always good. So founders should always remember that the one shareholding agreement today will change after a year or two, because the new investor will come in. So he should not feel that this is the lifelong agreement. Slowly.
Also, even the present investors will change the terms.
Yeah, will change. Yeah. So so long as he has the financial and operational flexibility, in terms of the behavior, in terms of the management, in terms of what is written in the documents, I think that could be a fair agreement for everybody.
So I've seen founders bicker on small terms and take it for weeks, almost risking the whole investment. So that's also another balance to sign. I mean, like, how far do you negotiate? And like you rightly said, they should be mindful of the fact that these terms are not forever. It may be until the next big round of investment.
Yeah, these terms are not forever. Plus, if you're getting money from the investor faster, that's how this. You should have to choose your fights. Where you should fight, where you should not fight. And probably it's more of a negotiation and a business case that if you're taking too much of time on indemnity, you have to give it indemnity, because you are in control of the company, you are in the management of the company. But yeah, you have to explain that indemnity cannot be open-ended, or cannot be 100 times of what the investment is coming in. So this is all commercial negotiation. But ideally, you should in a particular term sheet, you focus on these areas which we have discussed today. Those areas you should focus on and negotiate. Rest all is the provisions which relates to all this and which relates to the market practice, because an investor will come who is putting money into you, not the company, basically on the founders. He will want certain protection, certain additional protection, and if you grow, all these things will slowly go away.
Yeah, so I think that's a balance to draw. I mean, take care of some most important things, and then let's let go, because the money coming in sooner is going to help the growth faster. So
yeah, I've seen founders negotiating 2-3 weeks on transfer restriction, ROFR, but
it's a worst case scenario.
Yeah, but you are in a stage where there is no liquidity available. There has to be a buyer for you to sell. So there is no point in taking 3 weeks on ROFR restriction that you want 15% to be free that you can sell. There has to be a buyer for that. You need money for the company. ROFR where company money is in the pocket of the founders, not in the company. So no investor, at least when the Series B stage, will put money for the founders. They will put money into the company.
Yes.
It's a very dynamic process, dynamic thing. It makes a lot of commercial sense to negotiate a term sheet. with the with the investors, and follow it, or honor it. The most important part is that you take time to negotiate, but you must honor what you have signed, so that there's no bad vibes created, because if your early investors are not happy with the functioning, it impacts your next round
subsequent. Yes.
That's very important.
So I think that is the most important. Understand every single term and make sure you're at peace with it.
Yes.
And so Dhiraj, thank you so much. We went little beyond our planned time, but thank you so much. I think this is very, very essential. And it's something that, especially, I mean, given that like CIE is an early stage incubator, most startups raise their first formal round of funding during the time that they're with us.
Yeah.
And this keeps coming all the time. So it's good that like you laid the kind of the broad framework for these, so at least they get a sense of what. And as we discussed, we will be putting out the template as well, explaining these terms based on the inputs you've given, and putting it out there for a reference, so that like somebody can just refer to it when they come across these terms.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be.
Thank you, Dhiraj. Thank you so much for taking the time. So everyone, that was Dhiraj Sinha. He has a law firm, works a lot with startups, and he's been advising a few different funds, was part of the SucSEED Venture Angel Network, along with Vikrant. And now that, along with Triplety, has become the SucSEED Indovation Fund, a formal VC fund. So Dhiraj is one of the 6 general partners in the fund. Very active in the, I mean, he's a lawyer otherwise, but very active in the startup space. So anybody, if at all you have any questions or concerns where you need some startup legal help, somebody familiar with the whole startup world, do reach out. Just reach out to Pragya, Sai, or me. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you.